Hi, this is Eternal King here bringing you another LOR video today. So I wanted to do a video on how ladder actually works in LOR. So if you don't know, um, and you have very little experience with ranked ladder play, maybe you're a Path of Champions player who then exclusively plays quick play, you have very little ranked experience. Maybe for whatever reason, it seems increasingly that the number of LOR players that are left are essentially hard casuals who don't really know how to play the game anymore. It's exceptionally distressing. But yeah, I'll talk about how ladder works. So first of all, standard. I will show you what standard looks like right now in terms of the format. It is Z. Literally, you look at every single deck that is performing in terms of top win rate right now in standard, and it's just, Z. Sometimes it's Zed with Lucian, sometimes it's Zed with Lulu, but it's basically just decks that provide a substantial aggressive curve that opponents don't feel can be adequately answered with control tools available in the format. Again, Zed Lulu is not a new deck. This is not a card pile. This is actually like, a proper deck that you can play. Right? It's an actual archetypal list with a very narrow curve that, is not new to the game and is in fact destroying standard right now. Every single Z deck that has an aggressive curve is destroying standard, and then the next most competitive thing after Z, with his just kind of 3 mana, hard to remove essence, the next most competitive thing after Z is Jinx, right? So like basically vanilla LOR stuff is what's dominating ladder right now. It's Jinx, it's Zed, it's Lulu, and then obviously Lucian, because he's just like a 2-1 champion that is mildly competitive, right? So it's like this stuff. And that's just like statistics. Like that's the great thing about ladder, is that we can actually kind of go through what works and what doesn't in terms of competitive LOR. And that's what I kind of focus on in this channel, is talking about like, well, what's the difference between a card pile that wins 80% of games for 10 games and a deck that wins, 60% of games over 300 games? Well, the deck that wins 60% of games over 300 games is actually better because it's the law of large numbers. It has actual statistical relevance. It has, actual dedicated, support in terms of the way the deck functions and numerical relevancy. So like typically in standard, every single deck that is succeeding in the format right now is exceptionally down to earth and exceptionally simple. That's just statistically relevant. I think the craziest thing that's going on in standard right now is like my Nightfall deck that I showed you that's winning 55% of games in standard. That's like the highest, synergy crazy thing with Chaincaster and whatever. And even that deck is exceptionally down in terms of the curve. It's basically like a 3 mana curve. So like all these decks that have 3 mana curves are dominating standard statistically. That's just factually accurate. And then so it's either going to be your Zed decks. Sometimes it's Zed Lulu. Sometimes it's Zed Lucian. All these decks have like a 58% win rate in standard. They're all exceptionally aggressive. And then you also have Nightfall being 55%, and then Jinx also being like 56%. You know what a Jinx deck looks like. It's also exceptionally low curve and down. It's competitive. It's low curve. It's aggressive. It's easy to play. Now, when it comes to Eternal ranked, it's very similar. The thing about quick play, and I've long suspected this about LOR, is that quick play tends to prioritize hands that are optimal for you. You'll see things like meme decks will perform much, much better in quick play thanks to just like weird casual hand prioritization stuff. Meanwhile, what you find on ladder is that your hands tend to chump up a lot more. You tend to draw suboptimally a lot more. This is just something I've suspected about LOR for a very long time, that like, why is it that in quick play a deck can dominate 10 games and then you put it on ladder and it just instantly loses? It's the same deck, it's the same cards. Yes, there's obviously stiffer meta competition, but it's also like something more, I've always felt, in terms of the way the ladder environment works. You know, a Zero Relia could lose 10 quick play games in a row, but then you put it on ladder and it's going to win 60% of games in a row. Like, why? Why is it doing better on ladder than it does in quick play? Like, it doesn't make sense, but that's the way the math works out. Ladder is built different. Ladder is a different environment than quick play. Why is it that Sunny is hard stuck diamond in Eternal ranked, but you know, and it's typically never masters in Eternal ranked. But I bet you if him and I dueled on quick play, he'd probably beat me just with like random, you know, mystery poker nonsense, because I just wouldn't know what he was playing. But then I would far surpass him in a ladder environment. I'd climb to masters in a weekend, which I've done before. A single weekend, so that's like a 2-day climb to masters, which is, you know, basically Majin Bay levels of competitive play. Why though, right? Like that's kind of the big thing, is that just quick play tends to prioritize memes, it tends to prioritize bad decks, it tends to even out win rates between competitive and non-competitive decks. Meanwhile, the way that the ladder environment works is it tends to accentuate the difference between competitive and non-competitive decks, right? So like why is, if you play quick play standard, why is, you know, Zed Lulu gonna dominate ladder? Like Zed Lulu is not a complicated deck, it's not an interesting deck, but it's absolutely dominating the standard format because it's competitive and it's built well. Like that's the same, you know, if Zed Lulu is the tempo deck for standard, then a Zero Relia is the tempo deck for Eternal. They both, one wins 58% of games, which puts it at the top of the standard power curve. The other deck wins 60% of games, putting it towards the middle of the Eternal power curve, or higher middle. Like it's pretty high up there. And it also depends on your tech choices. Like there are people that report 80% win rates on ladder with the Zero Relia, just based on tech decisions and things like that. So like these are good decks, objectively good decks. And like without proper ladder stats, without reviewing ladder stats, everything is the same. You can literally just play whatever you want. You could play birds with Garen if you wanted to and report like a huge win rate with Garen birds, or report a huge win rate with scouts, or report a huge win rate with Teemo Caitlyn, right? And like you could do that in a quick play environment. I guarantee that you can do that. But you start bringing these decks into Eternal Ladder, and in a, you know, much more hyper competitive environment, you're gonna struggle. And part of it is the weird draws that you get off quick play, but also the other part of it is essentially meta pressure, right? You need to deal with 10 players who are going to be playing Spectral Matron spam. You need to deal with 20 players who are going to be playing Spectral Matron spam. So they play Spectral Matron, Heisho, Spectral Matron, Heisho, Cythria. Like, what are you going to do with your deck? Specifically, your deck that you have built that is just like mid-range meme, random card pile nonsense. What are you going to do when you go on ladder and then 10 players do that to you? Like, that's kind of the difference maker, right? So it's the same thing with standard. It's like, what are you going to do in standard when Zed comes down on 3 and just tempos you out? Well, you need to do something. Otherwise, you're going to lose. And it turns out that everyone's losing to Zed right now in standard. Like, that's just statistical relevance. Go to Runeterra AR, go to stats, go to standard. Zed is destroying, is in all the top decks. Jinx is like second, and then like Nightfall, my Nightfall deck is like third. That's just math. My Nightfall deck is like third best. Jinx is second best, and then all these all these Zed decks are like number 1. That's just how math works. And thankfully, because we have ladder, and because we have statistical relevance, we know what is best and what is not, objectively speaking. You can't really get around that. But yeah, in quick play, everything's the same. Honestly, just play whatever random cards you want in quick play. Just build a random card pile of nonsense. The opponent won't know what you're doing, therefore you're going to win for that one game that you play your random nonsense. And then you swap to another random nonsense deck, and you play one game and you're going to win that. And you swap to another random nonsense deck and you're going to win that. You go to ladder, now everyone's sweating, right? Now everyone's actually playing the game for real. Now it's just Spectral Matron Heisho, Spectral Matron Heisho, Cythria. Now their board's 40-40 wide. How are you going to win into that with your bad mid-range deck? You're not. You're not. This is the thing. is that the opponent just starts playing like Morgana on 5, Cloud Drake on 6, and then Spectral Matron spam, and you're just like, what do I even do? Well, you don't do anything because your deck is bad. Like, that's the thing, right? Is you need to have actual play in these matchups. My Rise deck has play into that matchup. My standard Nightfall deck might have play into that matchup. Um, Again, obviously, Ziggs Poppy would have play into that matchup because you can burn them out. Azir Aurelia could, tempo them out. Even standard Zed might have an okay game into Matron spam, right? Even just like if you just copy paste the standard Zed lists and then play them in Eternal, they might have play. All these are actual decks, is what I'm saying, right? And the thing is, we have ladder pressure to properly quantify the performance of these decks. Swain Nora, things like that. We do have actual decks, Nasus. We have actual stats for actual decks to properly quantify their performance. Gangplank, Sejuani. So like that's the big difference between, oh man, I'm super sweating it out in casual versus, oh my god, I'm on ladder now, shit's gotten real and I have to actually play the game. You have to play, typically, even the best players that I've seen online who mostly just copy paste deck ideas or build random nonsense, they can't really hit that middle ground very well. Typically those players will just, when they have to actually hit masters, they'll just lock in the Eddy, right? Because they're, typically kind of bad. Like, sure, they can do quick play nonsense, mystery poker, and then they can do, the one big meta deck when they're, when push comes to shove, but there's nothing in the middle. There's no new ideas, right? There's no new decks. There's no really anything that is of interest. High synergy, champ level ups, some sort of actual meta impact. Even like revitalizing old archetypes to be competitive again. Like they don't do any of that. There's none of that. It's typically just random card piles and jank, and then, oh my god, now I have to play the game for real, and then they lock a competitive deck. There's very little middle ground. It's like, yes, in quick play whatever you want. It's a casual format. There's no way to track your stats accurately. There's no way to know that what you're doing is worthwhile beyond, most of the time you won't even see people with 10 games played on their random nonsense deck. The nice thing about my, high synergy mid-range brews is they tend to get picked up, right? So obviously, I talked about previously in my last video that Iron Conquest Nightfall is a top standard meta deck now. Specifically with Iron Conquest, Chain Caster, that sort of thing. It's a top meta deck. It was just an idea that I came up with that we live stream brewed on the channel and is now a top meta deck. Because it's an actual real deck. It levels champions, it has synergies, it's got an aggressive curve. It actually does something. And the same thing with Zed, right? You talk about Zed in standard. Zed levels exceptionally easily, basically off of nothing. So Zed is, the top competitive champion in standard. It's not complicated stuff. The way that LOR works in terms of actual numerical superiority over a large number of meta games is not complicated. You play 300 games with one deck across 20 players. That deck has to perform evenly for 20 players in terms of its competitiveness into whatever is also the top meta decks at the time. That's more important than anything else. That's the thing. So yeah, card piles basically have a lifespan of one game, and then they get discarded. A decent brew has a lifespan of 10 games, and then gets discarded. But actual good idea meta decks last forever. This new Nightfall deck will last forever. Obviously my Eternal decks last forever. Because they are built with actual ladder competitiveness in mind. Which is the same thing that you have to do. You can't just be like, I'm going to build worse Eddy. Well, it's like, well, worse Eddy is worse Eddy. Why are you building worse Eddy? Like, why would you do that? It makes no actual sense from a brewing perspective to take a deck that already exists. We have the best Demacia Eddy already exists. The best Freljord Eddy already exists. that's really enough Eddie to essentially represent the entire Eternal ladder scene. There is no more room for more Eddie. If you want to, you could try Akshan Eddie again. That was like an old school high synergy version of Eddie, which is just inferior, but you could try it. At least then you'd be doing a different region combo. But otherwise, yeah, there's just no reason. Quick Play prioritizes memes. It always has, it always will. It prioritizes mystery nonsense. And then Ladder prioritizes consistency. It prioritizes synergy. It prioritizes good deck building. And it prioritizes a number of games that is, 100 to 300 versus 1 to 10. There's a difference there. And it also prioritizes having multiple players run the same list. It is different. It's different from a building perspective. It's different from a player perspective. To have these things picked up and have them be useful. Random nonsense only gets you so far. Random nonsense gets beaten by Zed in Standard, which is sad. Like, literally for an Eternal player to say that Zed is the top meta champion just shows like how bad Standard players are. Just objectively speaking. Like, Zed should not be the #1 champion in a format, ever. But it just goes to show that most Standard players can't deal with, like, high pressure, high tempo decks. They can't do it. They have no concept of how to deal with it. They just can't. And then, obviously, in Eternal, you have a Zero Aurelia, which is going to basically just fold most people in half. On ladder, specifically. In Standard, whatever, you'll draw the perfect answers. In Quick Play, you'll draw the perfect answers every single game. Like, that's just how Quick Play works. If you're on the draw and you're playing, I'll give you like a really funny example that I see all the time. Say you're playing Bard, one of the least competitive champions in LOR history. You're playing Bard, but you're playing Bard not on ladder. You're playing Bard in Quick Play. Bard, right? So you're playing Bard in Quick Play. You want to know what card you'll draw every single game? Every single game in Quick Play you'll have, if you're all in the draw. Can you guess which one it is? It's Cosmic Chime. You'll have Cosmic Chime every single game in Quick Play with Bard. You'll have it as the perfect answer every single game that you play with Bard in Quick Play. You'll deal 2 damage to something, you'll stun something else. And play as many games as you want with Bard and Quick Play, you'll have it. Now take that exact same deck that you have no valid stats for, pull it on ladder, put it on ladder into Eddie. Put it on ladder into a ramp list, a go big list. Put it against that. And all of a sudden, you're just folding like a wet paper towel. You're folding in like 2 games. You're already hot swapping to a meta deck before you're even done talking about the deck that you built. It's different. It is a different thing. It used to be that we didn't even post stats for Quick Play because it was so irrelevant in terms of the large, scale of LOR as a video game. Like, it used to be that, like, okay, you're posting Quick Play stats, nobody gives a shit, like, because it's literally irrelevant. I believe the #1 version of Gangplank Sejuani is literally on a card stealing package, which is not the most competitive way to run Gangplank Sejuani, on ladder specifically. It's not the most competitive way, but it is just like, in Quick Play, one of the most competitive cards that you can run in a Gangplank Sejuani deck is Casino, right? It's Slotbot. Like, Slotbot is not the most competitive card that you can run in like a Gangplank Sejuani deck with like a card stealing package. It's just not. Objectively speaking, it's not. But like in Quick Play, it might be because it's random nonsense and people won't know what to do. Like, that's the difference, right? The difference between like Quick Play nonsense and an actual good deck is that the nonsense will work more in Quick Play, and then as soon as you go on ladder, it just instantly folds as an inferior version of the deck that you're tracking stats for, 100% of the time. This is just objectively true about LOR. And I think the person that I always go back to in terms of like the proper way to build decks is obviously Majin Bey. Majin Bey was one of the most competitive players in LOR history. He built Swain Nora, and Swain Nora is still the most competitive deck, control deck in Eternal, and will be forever, because he just built it right. He built it competitive. There's really no other objective thing to say other than like this is the polar opposite of like quick play card pile nonsense, because it's high synergy. It's flipping Swain, it's flipping Nora. It is running Leviathan boat as a win condition. It has all the comprehensive removal cards that you need. It's actually like good, right? And then when I built Rise to replace his version of Rise, I built it to be good. Like, I don't really know how else to phrase that. That doesn't sound condescending, but like that's the thing. It's like my Rise, his Swain Nora, the same ideas in mind. Comprehensive control packages, appropriate amount of stall, proper answers to things, high synergy, win condition, same idea. They were built with identical ideas in mind. When I upgraded to Zero Relia with Emp Army, I built it to be competitive. I built it to be good, right? Like, it's just this thing of like, it's not complicated, but it works. It works because it has to be picked up by a lot of different players. It has to have a central power curve that makes sense and that works. But beyond that, that's kind of what makes the difference between a competitive deck and a non-competitive deck. Why is Zed the number one standard champion? Why is Azir Aurelia one of the number one eternal champions? Like, it's just because it works, right? That's the kind of thing about like actual competitive decks versus random nonsense. It's just like play 300 games with your deck, otherwise don't talk to me. And if you adopt one of my decks, play 300 games with it, and then tell me how you do with it. And the thing is, my decks get tracked, and most other people's don't for that exact same reason, is because they're essentially taking anecdotal evidence and trying to replace statistical evidence with anecdotal evidence. And it's like, no. Take my word for it that your version of Elite's Demacia Eddy is not better than Matron Spam Demacia Eddy. It's just not. It's not when you provide any sort of statistical relevance on ladder. It's just not. Again, if you can show me on ladder that you can pilot, elites with an Eddy top end to be superior than Matron Spam Eddy with Heisho and the combo, I'll believe you. If you can't, then why are you wasting everybody's time? That's about where I land in terms of LOR, is that like I've been exposed to some of the best players in gaming history, right? Swim, I have the number one Swim deck that will be with me forever because he was, at the time, the number one LOR player. I will have Swain Nora with me forever because for a time, Majin Bay was the number one LOR player ever. I look at these people and I say, them good players, them good decks. And I use that as sort of a roadmap to build out my own versions of decks, Rise, Azir Aurelia, that are going to be the most competitive versions of decks forever. Possibly Ziggs Vex as well. But, you got to run the numbers. There's no sidestepping it. You can't play 10 games with a meme and say that that's something. It's not. You got to play 100 games. And you have to have that deck piloted by 5 different people. I think that's like the bare minimum of statistical relevance, is 100 games spread out by 5 people. Each person plays 20 games apiece. If you do that and you pass that test, that's really the only thing that matters. Because otherwise you're basically just measuring mystery poker. Mystery poker just being someone doesn't know what you're playing. They don't know what cards you're running. They don't know what your deck is. And that gives you a advantage in the same sense that if you play hide and seek, the person that's hiding has the advantage. Like, it's just common sense. If you don't know what the person's doing, you can't play around them. And also, if the person's not doing anything, that's also an advantage because you're basically respecting someone that doesn't deserve your respect. The deck doesn't deserve your respect. That's also huge as well. And that's kind of the pitfall that I fall into, is that like I'll look at someone and I'll be like, okay, I'm respecting you, I'm not playing optimally, show me what you got. And then I'm like, oh wait, you don't got nothing. Why am I playing like this? Like, I'm playing like a competitive player into a non-competitive player, which is bad. Like, don't, it's typically very bad to do that. So at the end of the day, statistical relevance over anecdotal nonsense, math over, card piles, stats to essentially measure the competitiveness and relevance of decks over nothing, essentially. That's the only way to measure. Azir Aurelia, 60% win rate deck. Zed, 58% win rate deck in standard. These two decks, basically represent some of the best that LOR has to offer in each format, respectively. That's not me, that's math. This is Eternal King, signing out.